Here we are live once again with the Letter Winners morning show here with myself at CF Roton and my co-host, the purveyor of the CFF site, Michael Bainbridge. Michael, you made a request from me off air that you wanted to see me wear a BC jersey. I do not own a BC, Boston College jersey, because I went to University of Massachusetts and we don't like those collar-popping blue bloods. So I would never, ever have a BC jersey. However, because of your request, right? There it is. There's a Red Sox jersey. Okay? Is that close enough, my friend?
Yeah. Do we apply the win on my side to our overall total for last week? I hope we did, because
well, of course we did. That was your play. Just because, I went contrarian, that still is your play. And, of course, you deserve that win, my friend. And we went 6-4 last week. So, fortunately, that's 4 straight weeks where we have combined for a winning total. So we're doing all right in the aggregate. But you do, obviously, as we discussed, it was a bet. I made a bet. So I owe you something. I'm not sure exactly what you wanted, but I was thinking, when you come to visit me in Southern California, all right, over the course of the summertime for an EDM festival, I can either buy you a pair of fuzzy boots that you'll likely be wearing or assless chaps. Do you have a preference?
Glow sticks, apparently, because that's what everybody does at EDM festivals that I like. Glow sticks and drugs.
Hey, so be it.
I know you can supply that.
Okay, well, I'll do my best. Luckily, in California, those are usually plentiful. We're half hour from the border in San Diego. I'll see whatever I can drum up for you there, my friend. That being said, we're going to move on to our late injury news and the impact thereof. Big one coming out yesterday, breaking late. It was just confirmed this morning because it was kind of more in rumor status. Jonathan Mingo out for an extended period of time with a broken foot. I can speak from experience. That is a horrible injury. You saw what it did to Des Bryant's career. Saw what it did to Julian Edelman. Terrace Marshall had a foot injury back in 2019, re-injured it in the lead up to the draft. That is a nagging injury, not a good thing for Mr. Mingo. Next item of news, Skylar Thompson, head coach of Kansas State, Chris Kleeman, early in the week said that he is, quote, not likely to play, listed as doubtful. All of a sudden, a miraculous Wes Unseld-like return for Mr. Thompson. It's probably a good thing for him because Will Howard was also banged up last week. He did not finish out the game. They had their backups go in. They were dreadful. So the fact that Skylar Thompson is playing against Oklahoma is a big factor, and you'll want to be obviously accounted for in that game. Lastly, for this set, JT Daniels, game time decision against Arkansas. That is a big deal because if Mr. Daniels cannot go, hello, Stetson, my old friend, I'm here to bet against you once again. As the song goes, we'll be taking the reps most likely. Michael, what do you have to say about that 3 pieces of news?
Yeah, obviously the focus for us is, as college fantasy analysts, would be on the Mingo situation. I'm not sure how Ole Miss is going to play this with him out. So it'll be interesting to see because Mingo is one of Ole Miss's outside receivers, right? And they got Braylon Sanders on the opposite end with Ontario Drummond as the lead dog inside in the slot. But I don't know of an immediate replacement on the outside for Mingo. They could shift Drummond outside where he played last year because they do have a plethora of options in the slot. Maybe we see more John Rice Plumlee. Maybe we see more of the Western Kentucky transfer Jakur Pearson. Or maybe even they move Jerry and Ely into the slot. So they have more options inside. So I'll be curious to see if they actually flip Ontario Drummond outside to make up for the loss of Mingo. Other 2 pieces of news not really relevant to us in the college fantasy world. I think the JT Daniels news obviously has more impact on the actual game than from a fantasy standpoint with that one, with the total being so low. And then Skylar Thompson, not a ton of interest in the Kansas State quarterbacks. I did like the nickname that they've given Skylar Thompson as the Sooner Slayer. as because of his 4 touchdown performance against Oklahoma last year. So, maybe if he does play, there's more interest in that 10.5 line in that matchup.
Yeah, and certainly from a DFS perspective with Thompson, his price is so suppressed in that main slate. You could certainly, if you're in the bargain bin world, well worth a play potentially. Like you said, he's done it before, and Oklahoma's not exactly smothered themselves in glory. In regards to JT and Daniels, that line dropped from 18.5 to 16, I believe is what it's right around at right now. So that's generally what you're looking at for a QB being out. It's a 2.5 point drop. So that indicates that the Sharps think he is not going to play, or they are at least trying to provide for the eventuality that might not happen. Next set of news: David Bell, game time decision. Head coach Jeff Brom went on to his show and waxed poetic about that. It was interesting because he was pretty forthcoming with Payne Durham, where he said he's doubtful. He's not going to be playing. But he was kind of cryptic about Bell. Leads me to think that after, a concussion, he probably will be back. But, that's still technically a game time decision. You have to monitor that heading up to the game. For UAB, Liberty, which is probably one of the best G5 matchups out there this week, Tyler Johnson is out indefinitely. And he had been rotating with Dylan Hopkins for the course of pretty much, this season. Hopkins missed all of 2020. He actually was probably the better quarterback in 2019. Heading into 2021, obviously, he was kind of a split backfield, but Hopkins was really good. He threw for over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns last game. So that's something you definitely want to be aware of. And lastly, for this step, CJ Stroud is expected to start. He's been practicing all week. For good things from Ryan Day about him. Kyle McCord, while he threw for 300 yards and 2 touchdowns, didn't go out and go 25 for 25. He had a couple of little hiccups on that first drive, and it was against Akron where they kind of didn't need to do too much. So for that slate of news, Michael, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm fading CJ Stroud in my DFS lineups this week. Opponent, Rutgers, 7th in the nation in scoring so far this season. Haven't had a gauntlet per se as for opponents that they faced this year, but we saw what they did last week against Michigan, completely shut down their running game. I think we just need to kind of flip our mindsets of how we think about Rutgers these days under Greg Schiano, and they don't turn the ball over, play really good defense. So I think it might be a struggle for CJ Stroud this week, and I think that provides just storylines galore potentially with Kyle McCord. If Stroud struggles, do we see Ohio State Twitter just clamoring for Kyle McCord to come in the second half if CJ Stroud succeeds, and proves to everyone else that the coach has made the right decision? How does that affect McCord's mindset moving forward? So a lot of storylines with that Ohio State Rutgers game.
Yeah, we could possibly see a reprieve of Oklahoma where we want Caleb chance turn to we want Kyle. That's entirely possible. And McCord's a guy you looked great in the spring game, absolutely. And I have him stashed in several leagues, according to C2C Dynasty formats, with the eventuality that either he transfers out or maybe he does eventually supplant Stroud. That'll be a very interesting storyline to keep a note of. Next set of news, Jack Cohn rolled his ankle last week. We saw Drew Pine come in and looked all right. He definitely acquitted himself pretty well. He was splitting first-team reps with Drew Pine this week, and we heard Brian Kelly said if Tyler Buckner, La Jolla boy from here in San Diego, if Buckner is available, which they expect him to be, he's expected to see time as well. So that's an interesting kind of development where you could possibly have 3 QBs that end up getting in the game there, depending on what happens. And they're playing Cincinnati. So very interesting storyline. Definitely something I want to keep abreast of. Next, Hendon Hooker is practicing and, man, in a bit of coach speak, progressing towards 100%. Okay. All right. Well, whatever you say there, Mr. Heupel, fine. Progressing towards 100%. That being said, that's a pretty tasty matchup against Missouri, who we saw God, that defense. Oh, boy.
Hey, you backed them.
It went to overtime, Mike. It went to overtime. It wasn't like it was a blowout. It was, come on, give me a break here. It wasn't Iowa, Maryland out there. It went to overtime. It could have went either way. Missouri just cannot stop. So you can see Hendon Hooker run for, 200 yards if he does end up playing. But it's definitely something you want to, keep apprised of and be very aware of for those Tennessee beat writers. And, of course, the Discord, which I'm sure you'll be all over, because that is a pretty relevant situation. Since if Joe Milton's in, that's a drastically different prospect than if Hendon Hooker is in with a great pair of legs like he has. Jaden DeLora and Max Borghi, both, quote-unquote, good chance to play, according to Nick Rolovich, head coach there at Wazoo. So, I'll tell you one thing. They better hope Jaden DeLora is playing, because we saw that quarterback quagmire that they tried out. Obviously, Guarantano Bay, he imprisoned anybody who was watching that game. The kid was like a top 10 recruit coming out of high school, and he ain't the answer. And neither is Cameron Cooper. So DeLora looked good before he got hurt 2 games ago. He threw 2 touchdowns. They were up 14-0, and then USC went off to rattle, 40x, unanswered points to just put it on them. So that is definitely something you want to watch. Borghi, he had 40 yards before he went out, and then Kenny McIntosh took over last week. Didn't have the same pop. McIntosh is more between the tackles kind of guy, and they really work better when they're in tandem, as a 50-50, whereas it kind of – when they don't have Borghi's explosiveness to really stretch the field a little bit, at least horizontally, teams can kind of stack the box, and you didn't see McIntosh perform too well. Lastly, Austin Jones is questionable again. He did not play last week. Nathaniel Pete, excellent. A couple games ago, he took over for Jones, broke a nice big long run down the left sidelines. He would obviously be the preferred option, as EJ Smith, Emmitt Smith's son, is also out for this game. So that's something you certainly want to keep an eye on for those DFS plays, and potentially slot whichever one in that does end up playing, if it's Jones, or if Jones is out. Frankly, that's probably best case scenario for DFS, because there's no conjecture. Mike, any thoughts there on that?
Yeah, a lot of thoughts. Starting with Stanford, I'm avoiding that whole backfield entirely, regardless if Austin Jones is in or out. I think he's in from the last I saw. I may be mistaken, but I think he'll be a go this week, which makes that situation even less desirable. Stanford, surprisingly, one of the worst offensive lines in the country. So you want to avoid that situation entirely for your DFS lineups. Hendon Hooker, he really popped in our projections when running an optimizer for our DFS lineups this week. He leaves a lot to be desired as a passer. We all know that, but his wide receiver core is 100% healthy now with Jalen Hyatt back. And as we discussed, the Missouri run defense is putrid. So Hooker's really good with his legs. He could take advantage of that, and he's really low priced on DraftKings at 6,800. So he's a guy that you can sneak into your lineup there. And then with regards to Jack Cohn, we want to make sure, or we want to see if he's playing or not, because those unders look really enticing if he's going to play, because Brian Kelly, as you mentioned, made it known that they're going to play multiple quarterbacks this week. I think my partner at the CFF site, Joe, had a little birdie tell him in his ear that it's going to be Drew Pine this week for Notre Dame. So, maybe we get a DNP for Jack Cohn this week. But if he sees time, I really like that under.
Yeah, certainly. And especially when it comes to Cohn, I believe he started out on DraftKings at 221.5. That bumped down to 212.5 after things kind of settled in, and it remains to be seen if that'll even be further corrected. But that's certainly something you want to be aware of for that under possibility. God, anytime you hear about 3 quarterbacks possibly getting reps, especially when you're playing against Cincinnati, color me skeptical when it comes to Austin Jones and Stanford. Yeah, Oregon ranked 31st in the country in terms of their overall team performance against the run. So that's a pretty stout front, as you might imagine, with the way they recruit, and obviously the way Mario Cristobal has run that program pretty well. Next, going to move on to the sides. For a side, Penn State. If you remember last year, Indiana beat Penn State by Michael Penix, that dramatic, run to the end zone, the left corner. He goes and stretches it out, and did he make it? Didn't he make it after the call is confirmed? And, frankly, one of those, an amazing dramatic game that was won by Indiana during that pandemic shortened season where, I know for a stone cold fact due to speaking, I might have a mole or two as well, Michael, just like Joe does. But I know for a fact that they've been circling in Penn State in Happy Valley that game. They've been talking about it for a year. That has been used as full-on bulletin board material. They've been waiting to get their hands on Indiana. And the circumstance being, again, it's a night game in Happy Valley. I'm telling you, that place is going to be rocking. We saw what it looked like during the whiteout against Auburn. They're going to be just as amped up for this. And Indiana is limping into this game. I mean, in Michael Penix's case, coming off an ACL, quite literally, frankly. His footwork, as I've watched him in the pocket, has not been good. Like feet clicking, crossing his feet, does not look like he's just kind of been throwing the back, throwing up his back foot kind of flicks. It has not looked like the same guy to me that we saw last year. And when you're going up there against the Penn State team with an axe to grind, and who has looked great. I mean, we talked about all offseason. Mike Yursich coming in as the offensive coordinator, former OC of Oklahoma State, most recently for Texas, got the boot through no fault of his own when Tom Herman hit the road. New regime comes in with Sarkisian. They don't need to keep Yursich around. Goes right over to Penn State, and he's really revamped that offense. They look great. Can't say enough. I'm taking Penn State at 12.5 over Indiana. And then next, kind of dovetailing with Mr. JT Daniels with a lot of speculation whether or not he will play or not. Man, the under looks pretty strong anyways in that particular game. But then you throw in the uncertainty at quarterback at 48.5, with both teams playing at a pretty slow, deliberate kind of a pace. Man, I have a hard time taking it over in that game. No matter who wins, I think it's going to be, a slower pace type game without a doubt. You saw what happened with Georgia and Clemson, with that snooze fest of a game where nobody could do anything. So I sincerely think we're going to see a similar situation between those two stout defenses with UGA and Arkansas. Michael, any sides you would like?
Yeah, quick prediction to piggyback off yours. What we saw from Talia Tungavailoa last night, you're going to see the same thing from Michael Penix Jr. tonight. I think a couple of picks there. I don't recall seeing it on Prize Picks or anything, but I would take the over on interceptions for Michael Penix tonight in Happy Valley. I like Memphis -10 against Temple. Temple doesn't do anything particularly well. I think last week's performance against who they play, Wagner, just a flash in the pan. Juwan Mathis looked good, but I mean, I could look good against Wagner probably. They're allowing 38 points per game. They run the ball on 57% of the time, Temple does, and they're only averaging 3.5 yards per carry. Temple's #1 ranked pass defense. Again, I think it's a little skewed because of the competition they face. Let's see who they face. Rutgers, not a very good passing team. Akron faced a Boston College team without Phil Jurkovec, and then Wagner last week. So I think that's their pass defense a little overrated there. So I do like Memphis -10 this week. Other one I sprinkled in a little bit was East Carolina and Tulane over 64.5. I think you got two teams that are 97th or lower in defensive pass success rate. So I think we can see Holton Ahlers and Michael Pratt, the two quarterbacks, both find success this week. Both are 100th or lower in explosive plays allowed. So we could see some big plays tonight. And then both are top 40 in the country in plays per minute. So they do play at a fast pace. So I think we'll see some points in that Tulane-East Carolina matchup.
Yeah, that is a defense optional game if I ever saw one, especially with East Carolina, rallying to score 21 points at the end of the game against Marshall to just steal that victory out of nowhere. You can't count them out. I mean, especially with Aller. While I'm not a big Holton Ahlers fan, just in terms of watching him and his funky release and him spiking balls on out passes, when it's time to go, they can go.
They're the king of garbage time points. East Carolina and Homewood. King of garbage time points.
They love it. And he's got Keaton Mitchell, who is, extremely explosive. We've talked about him a couple of times before on the show. I'm a big fan of Keaton Mitchell. So there's definitely all kinds of point possibilities in that game. Next, getting to DFS time, as everybody likes. We have our core 2 plays from our main slate. Dontario Drummond for me, $7,500, especially with the news of Mingo being out. If you look at the game flow of last year's game, where it was a 1,370 total yard eruption between those two teams, what Kiffin did was 2 things. One, they ran the ball way more than I think anybody realized. They went, I think, like 275 yards or something to that effect. Both Snoop Conner went for 120. Jerry and Ely went for 113. But in the passing game, it wasn't a lot of spread it out type of mentality. Kenny Yeboah and Elijah Moore were the only 2 guys that made any sort of an impact. But both of them went ham in that game. Each of them went over 100 yards. Each of them had a touchdown. Both of them had, approaching double-digit catches. It was just they leaned on their 2 best playmakers. And when you see Drummond in that slot, they'll probably flex him out a little bit more today. Like you said, they'll probably move him around the formation. But when you see Drummond, the way he's been producing this season, he's looked excellent. You get him in space, and he's been able to really create those yards after catch. I just think that it's going to be tough to fade him in what projects to be obviously, the game of the weekend. Everybody can't wait to watch that. You just fade them at your own peril simply because that game stripped. And I can't see Lane Kiffin, varying from what works, because they put up over 40 points last year. The only team that did so against Alabama. Next, your favorite and mine. Okay, maybe not your favorite, Mr. Michigan man, with your hat backwards there. But Trevion Henderson, $6,600. I think he's the 10th running back on the slate. He still can't crack that $7,000 mark when they're going up against Rutgers. Obviously, Greg Schiano, a lot of respect for Mr. Schiano. But I think, in fact, the point is, I think that game's going to be closer than I think people realize. They see the name on the marquee, Rutgers. They say, oh, well, it's Rutgers. Yeah, this is Schiano Rutgers. He took them their best season of all time, with Schiano, and he's back, and he's in year 2. And the guy runs a tight ship, obviously, which frankly makes me think that you're going to see more Trevion Henderson than you saw against Akron, where he only got a few carries, went 95 yards and 2 touchdowns. I think you'd even see him more in the passing game out of the backfield. That first game that he played, you saw him break off a 70-yard swing pass and take it to the house. Haven't really needed to use him in that capacity since then. He rushed for 220 yards, 2 games ago, of course, with 3 touchdowns. But I think you see a little more of that. And that even kind of makes me a little intrigued about the possibility of, on FanDuel, I believe his receiving yardage was like 10.5 receiving yards. I think he goes over that pretty comfortably, which is why FanDuel has just been putting out a ton of lines. They're really trying to go in and make their presence felt, and I appreciate it. Michael, your 2 core plays.
Yeah, I like Leddie Brown. He popped in our projections this week. The thing with Leddie is he's getting a bunch of his yards in the first half. I got a stat for you with regards to Leddie. Texas Tech, their opponent this week, is minus 28 in their scoring margin in the first quarter this season. All 5 of Leddie Brown's touchdowns have come in the first half this week. Now, he takes a nosedive in the second half for whatever reason. But just those 2 kind of ends meeting, I think it should result in a good week for Leddie Brown. And obviously the volume is there for him, both running and receiving. No other running back in that backfield touches the football. I think he's in store for a good week. Second, the bane of my existence in college fantasy is CJ Verdell, but I'm riding him this week. Stanford dead last in the Pac-12 in rush defense, allow over 200 yards a game. Heck, they allowed 247 yards to Vanderbilt. Okay? If CJ Verdell doesn't pop this week, then he's out of my life for good. I've never gotten a week. He's similar to Marvin Mims, right? Never had a week where I've had him in my lineup and they've popped. Just never. And every time I avoid them, they go off. So we're gonna go back to the well one more time with CJ Verdell. This is the matchup where he can succeed.
He is the very essence of a trick or treat running back, and we're in October now, so it is the season for trick or treating.
It's not all his fault, right? Mario Cristobal does wonky things with that backfield. I get it. You guys like Travis Dye. Heck, I don't even think CJ Verdell played that much in the first half last week against Arizona, and then they kind of rode him down in the second half. I think Stanford can keep it a little bit closer than Arizona could, so I think they'll lean more on Verdell earlier in the game this week. So let's give it a shot with Verdell.
Absolutely, with that Oregon backfield, I find myself wanting to be able to look into my Mario Cristobal and predict the running back usage on a regular basis. But alas, the bargain bin. I'm going again. I really like some of the values down the board. Braylon Sanders, I think you simply can't avoid at this point at $4,800, given the Mingo news. They can't go and adjust the prices midweek. Once they're out, they're out. You don't just move them up and down. $4,800 for the primary and, frankly, secondary, it seems, outside receiver, given what we just talked about with the game script likely to happen, where they're probably going to focus on, in my opinion, if we're going by last year, probably going to focus on Sanders and Drummond, because to tie it up, Yeboah went 7, 181, and 2 last year. Good God. And Elijah Moore, 11 for 143, with the next highest receiver last year was Jerrion Ealy. He caught 1 pass for 18 yards. Every other player, they had only had 4 other guys who even touched the ball, each of them for 1 reception each last season against Bama. And, I see no reason why Lane Kiffin would go away from that game script. Again, another good play coming from that game. Snoop Conner is only $3,900, and as we mentioned, he went for 21, 128, led the team in rushing, and 2 touchdowns last year. He even caught a pass for 15 yards. So they went with a straight split backfield with nobody else touched that. You know what I mean? So when we're dealing with that sort of you're under $4,000, as we talked about last week, they get a little tighter as the season goes on. As there's more data to cull. That's how it is, and I don't know if you guys can hear that, but I'm on the clock in my fantasy hockey league. So, Michael, your bargain bin.
You're doing a fantasy hockey league as we're doing this live stream.
No, it's a slow draft, so they just it rolls through. I got to figure
loud horn in your ear.
I got to figure out who my third goalie is. I got to pair him up with Samsonov. I need to.
All right, you lost me. I'll go over mine quick here. Josh Johnson for Louisville. Braden Smith, primary slot receiver for Louisville, is out for the year. So Josh Johnson should step in there. He had 4 catches on 5 targets last week. And I think there's 62 game total, I believe, for Louisville Wake Forest. So there should be some points in that matchup. So in this slate, you're going cheap at wide receiver and spending up at running back and quarterback. So I like him as a potential option. And then a name that's just reemerged to all of us in college fantasy, Jahleel Billingsley. We had high hopes this year, got into Nick Saban's doghouse, seemingly out of the doghouse. It was a positive. I initially looked at the box score from last week because I obviously wasn't focused on Bama versus Southern Miss. And I was like, okay, they won by 40 points. Did Jahleel Billingsley get his numbers in garbage time? Nope, he did not. Okay, he was on the field early versus Southern Miss. 3,600. The biggest caution I have for rostering him in DFS this week, he is maybe going to be the highest owned player on the slate, depending on if a GPP or cash that you're playing. So everybody's going to load up on him. They're stacking this Alabama Ole Miss game. He's super cheap. So you're going to be, he gets points. Everybody else is going to get points.
Yeah, and last year, Miller Forrestall caught a touchdown in that game. And I think we can both agree, Miller Forrestall, when it comes to his athleticism, is just simply not in the same universe as Jahleel Billingsley. And like you said, it wasn't anything performance related. He got in the doghouse and in no uncertain terms. But then he's back. I find it interesting you're going with Josh Johnson there, Wake Forest. He was a guy I had in my DFS column, which you maligned. But yeah, of course, Michael, of course. You can't blame me for what the optimizer puts out. I don't know. I just report on it. Anyways, core 2 plays for the evening. This week, Mel Kiper released his too early one of his mock drafts, and the number 1 wide receiver that he has on his big board, he ranked him number 8 overall, was Jahan Dotson. Somewhat of a surprise to most people, certainly. You see Traylon Burks, 230 pounds, running at 22 miles an hour and everything. Garrett Wilson looking smooth as silk, but he likes Dotson, and hey, who am I to tell Mel Kiper and his excellent hair? No. So at $7,100 against Indiana, again, I think I've gone through that game enough in terms of the revenge spot. They're going to be out for blood. They are not going to stop. They're not going to put in the subs. They're going after Indiana. And next, I would like to think that this is probably the Verdell version of my play for this week. Looking at that QB slate, oh, man, it's just the late QB slate. There isn't a lot of values to be had. DJ Uiagalelei. If we all remember the BC versus Clemson game last year, all right, it was a shootout. DJ threw for 342 yards, 2 touchdowns. He also ran for 25 and a touchdown. I mean, come on. Come on. Are you kidding me? Here we go. Now's the time. If you're going to get right, this is the game to get right, okay? BC couldn't stop Missouri. Missouri's all right. I like Tyler Beatty. Connor Bazelak is a nice game manager, but come on, Clemson. Really? At $7,400, he's the 10th price QB on the slate. I just think at that kind of value, you have to give it a shot in an 8-game slate, and I'm going to hold my nose in Verdell this one. Michael, go.
You know that GIF where there's a miner shoveling cash into a burning barrel or whatever he is? That's going to be you this week if you start DJ. I get it. It'll be low ownership. If it's going to happen, it has to happen. It's going to happen at some point, I feel like. So give it a whirl. But again, he's burned too many bridges.
He did it last year. He did it. We'll see. My core plays Jaylen Warren for Oklahoma State, 25 carries plus in the last 2 games. They're riding him. Face a Baylor defense that's, worst performance of the year last year against Breece Hall, gave up almost 200 yards to Breece, allowing they're 85th in defensive rush PPA this season. So I like Jaylen Warren this week. He popped in our projections. Kenneth Walker for Michigan State. I mean, you're facing Western Kentucky. He had a down week last week against Nebraska. This has to feel like a bounce back spot, right? If game script, you want to keep that Western Kentucky offense off the field. They're expected to score points per Vegas this week. So I think they'll ride Kenneth Walker 20 plus carries this week. I think you got to have him in your lineups. I think they ride Kenneth Walker every single week with 20 carries, and I don't understand why you wouldn't. I would absolutely wind him up and let that man go. My bargain bin for the evening, Mr. Bean, Rowan Atkinson himself, Iowa State. Iowa State is not the Iowa State of 2020. Kansas, while not great, obviously, saw Mr. Bean. They're going to throw. 323 yards, 2 touchdowns last week. But the real play, and where obviously I don't expect much in the first half out of him, but I do think in garbage time, they don't take Bean out. He plays the whole game. And he's rushed at least 12 times in each of his 4 games this year and has had at least 54 yards on the ground in each of them. I think if he just throws one pass, one passing touchdown, gets to 250 yards, does enough on the ground in garbage time to be able to salvage maybe a 15 to 20 point showing. If you want to go that direction on the cheap in Superflex, that's where I'd be going with that. I also like Jermaine Brown. I've always been a big fan of Jermaine Brown for UAB. I like UAB a lot in this game over Liberty and feel like Brown certainly has the opportunity as the all-purpose back there to catch some passes out of the backfield. And I think they'll be running the ball more often than they like to run the ball anyways. Obviously, they got McBride there as well, but Brown's getting around 15 carries a game too. That's a straight split backfield with a run-heavy approach. Against the Liberty team, they got lit up by Syracuse and Sean Tucker last week, and they do not defend the run. So at $4,100 on the cheap side, I think that's a good play. Michael.
Yeah, like we talked about this last week. I really try and avoid, once we get later on in the year, I try and avoid those min salary players just because, it just really feels like a crapshoot at this point. I do like Jaden Williams from Boston College, though. If he's a guy that's caught 3 touchdowns in 4 games, he's starting on the outside opposite Zay Flowers. Again, it's against Clemson. It's going to be a tough matchup, but this is a guy that plays more than half the game. So I like him as a min price crapper there. And then Dawood Davis for Western Kentucky. The good news about Western Kentucky this year, and I thought coming into the year they'd use maybe between 7 and 8 receivers, spread the ball around. They're really a centralized target tree between 4 players with Jarrett Stearns and Malachi Corley. Dawood Davis is in that group. He's got the highest average depth of target amongst it on the team at 16.2. So maybe he hits a deep shot against that Michigan State secondary this week. And Western Kentucky is going to throw the ball 50 times tonight. So he'll easily pay off that $3,900 salary, in my opinion.
That's what they do. They throw the ball. Dawood come. Catch the ball and go home, as the song goes. I actually have Dawood in CFB winning edge, so I have him rostered and picked him up earlier. I would very much like to see him do well this week, of course. Lastly, we'll get into our promo code for Bet Spurts. You want to make sure if you go to Prize Picks, you use the promo code Bet Spurts, and you will get a nice $100 bonus, I believe. Last week, we even gave away 20 copies of Madden NFL. So that's always something you want to be aware of. We try to do what we can to incentivize our listeners, of course. Try to run through this pretty quick. Spencer Sanders, 234.5 passing yards against Baylor. Oh, how I love Spencer Sanders, Michael. I know you do too. I know you're a big fan of Spencer Sanders. Sure, he had a 323-yard performance last week. However, the previous 2 games, he's positively dreadful. I am not a fan. I don't expect hardly anything coming from him. You're talking about a Dave Aranda defense that is ranked 22nd in overall team performance against the pass. And I think you're going to see a lot more of, as you mentioned, Jaylen Warren, since they are ranked 74th overall in terms of well-trained performance against the run. Breece Hall, 105.5 rushing yards against Kansas. Go get it. I mean, he is the engine of that offense. He's proven time after time to be the dude. Obviously started off a little slow this year, exploded last week. I see no reason why he can't break a couple of big runs and easily clear that 105.5, and then they put him to bed. Michael, your favorite Bet Spurts picks?
Yeah, I'm going to run through these quick because my neighbors decided to exercise at 9:30 in the morning. And
That's what it is.
And one of my 3 dogs is going berserk. So I'm going to run through these really quick. Bryce Young, his Prize Picks is up to 314.5. I got him at 304.5. So we project him at 366 yards. I like the over for him. Dontario Drummond, we've already discussed him at length today. I like him over 6 receptions. Condensed target tree, they really only throw it to Drummond, Mingo, and Braylon Sanders. Now you eliminate one of those options. I like Drummond over 6 receptions this week. Ulysses Bentley for SMU, this is one to watch here. He's had a nagging injury that's been bothering him. I think he came out of that TCU game last week. The debate is if he plays this week against South Florida. If he does, I don't think they're going to ride him for too many carries to preserve him for conference play. Trey Siggers has looked pretty good as the backup there. So we're just hoping for 1 carry out of Bentley this week. I don't think he gets to that 104 mark.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And I actually had recommended Trey Siggers last week on the DFS side as a bargain bin play. It was like $3,600. Ended up running for 113 or something along those lines. And the previous week actually had 15 carries. So that isn't something that's a new thing. It continues to be that trend. Just moving on late, I'll finish this up so you guys' ears can stop ringing. I like Jerry and Ely. He's only at 49.5 on DraftKings. I think that's extremely low given the fact he ran for $120 last year. Listen, you're not going to beat Alabama with a one-dimensional game script. Lane Kiffin knows he's going to have to run the ball a little bit. Only concern you're going to have is how often do they flex him out, if at all, because he is their primary running back. Maybe Snoop Conner and Henry Parrish see a little more time this week. But, I mean, at 49.5, the juice is worth the squeeze, absolutely. And then lastly, FanDuel, Props to FanDuel. They've been putting out, my gosh, this week. They put out a ton of player props lines. If you were in a state that has FanDuel, start looking at them. All right, because I'm talking, what I really like is those random like 30 to 40 yard over-unders where you have players that just don't get a lot of volume, don't see a lot of snaps. I certainly accentuated that in my column this week. I like the Spencer Rattler under 28.5 rushing yards. If he gets sacked once, it's over. Okay, it's over. 11 out of 15 games that Spencer Rattler has started, he's gone under 28.5. This year it's been 2 out of the 4, but one of those was against Western Carolina in a 76-0 rout. He didn't get sacked against Nebraska. Otherwise, he just went at 29. He takes 1 sack, it's over. I just can't see him covering that. He's not a dual threat like Caleb Williams or anything. So that's going to do it for us. Appreciate you listening. Last shout out on the Discord goes to Andy1779. That's my homeboy from my mate from across the aisle. We appreciate him very much. Go check out the CFF site, and we appreciate you. Have a good Saturday.